Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today's Tuesday, February 4th, day 487 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem office with editor David Horovitz. Hi, David. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C., so we'll speak about what we've heard about his trip so far, what expectations are for continued ceasefire negotiations, and the different approach the Trump administration is taking with the coalition ministers and their desires for, among other things, the annexation of the West Bank. We'll speak about anticipation surrounding a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia and how everything is unknowable and fragile. All this and much, much more when we're back. 8 were wounded, 2 critically, in the shooting attack at an army checkpoint near the northern West Bank village of Tayasir this morning. The village is located close to Tubas, where the IDF has been operating these past several weeks. So, David, what do we know about initial reports from the IDF?
As far as we know, and this is going to have changed in the next few hours because we don't know the identity of the assailant, for example, and there are several people injured, including very seriously. It sounds like a single attacker at an army checkpoint got further than one would have expected or believed because got into the checkpoint, as you say, in an area where the IDF, or near to an area where the IDF has been operating, and was able to do considerable damage, even managed to escape afterwards before, it sounds like a soldier threw a hand grenade, somebody else fired, and he was eliminated. But a very serious incident, and a serious incident when you internalize that it's directed at soldiers at a checkpoint who are there because dangerous things can happen. And I'm sure there's a lot of investigating going on about how this happened.
David, let's turn to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's current visit to Washington, D.C. And we know that yesterday he met with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and we'll hear more about this as the day progresses, I'm sure. Today, he's meant to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. But before we talk about the idea of the second phase of the ceasefire and the talk surrounding that, I would like to first just talk about how the Trump administration is embracing Netanyahu and all parts of his government, including the far-right factions who have been pushing for annexation. So yesterday, there was an interesting tidbit in which Trump was asked by a reporter whether he would agree to annexation. And Trump noted that Israel is a, quote, small country, and he referenced his pen, that he was holding it in his hand, and Israel would be the very tip of the pen. What do you make of these comments? Because he didn't exactly negate the possibility of annexation outright.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, the top of his pen is Israel and the pen is the Middle East. And he's obviously very struck by that. So first of all, you mentioned the embrace of the far-right components of the coalition. Of course, there's just Bezalel Smotrich, religious Zionism party in the coalition now from the far right, because Itamar Ben-Gvir has bolted the coalition. And Steve Witkoff did meet with Smotrich. He certainly did not meet with Ben-Gvir. And he met, I thought it was interesting that he met with Smotrich along with Aryeh Deri, who is the leader of the Shas ultra-Orthodox party, and Ron Dermer, who we might discuss a little bit more, who's really the minister closest to Netanyahu and has evidently been given an increasingly elevated and central role in all dealings with the Trump administration, former ambassador to the United States and kind of Netanyahu's de facto ambassador to the Trump administration to some extent, I would say. So the embrace wasn't literal, but it was close. They were standing, close together in the photographs, Witkoff and Smotrich. It's obviously a significant and deliberate step where you have an administration, at the very least, seeking to encourage a core component of Netanyahu's coalition to stay in the coalition. Remember, Smotrich had been threatening quite overtly to bolt the government if after phase one there is not a return to the fighting. And in his statement at his weekly faction meeting yesterday, Smotrich did not reissue the threat. He said things that were not without a sort of relevance in that context. That the war goals have to be completed. Netanyahu says the same thing. So I think his tone was interestingly somewhat milder in the wake of, among other things, being dealt with by this administration, in contrast to the previous administration, which was actually weighing sanctions against him. And then, the bigger question of annexation, we should remember that this is an unknowable position where Trump personally is concerned, I would say. We've had many comments over the years indicating Trump's, lack of enthusiastic support, shall we say, for the settlement enterprise. It's interesting in terms of the size of the land. He's spoken in previous years about how little land there is, and the more of it that goes to settlement, the less there is to try and achieve historic agreements and so on. He's appointed an incoming ambassador, who won't even talk about the West Bank as the West Bank only talks about it in the biblical Judea and Samaria terms, which is, it's not a tacit, it's an explicit endorsement of Israel's undisputable right to that area. And that's a choice. Mike Huckabee was a choice that Trump made. So I at the moment, it's the same kind of potential mixed signals. And that was the case when he unveiled his attempt at resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, when Netanyahu thought that basically he was being given presidential support to annex all the settlements and the Jordan Valley and so on. And Jared Kushner rudely disabused him of that notion. This was a real fiasco towards the in the last period of the first Trump administration. And then when the Abraham Accords were brokered by Trump, and Israel normalized relations, most relevantly with the United Arab Emirates, it is widely known that one of the elements of that arrangement was there's not going to be annexation, certainly not for the time being. So if people think it's not entirely clear what Trump's position is, I think that's a sensible view. At some point, presumably, it may become clear, but we don't know for now what comments such as, "That's a very little country," like the top of my pen, we don't know what actual significance this is going to have in terms of policy.
Another unknowable is, of course, normalization with Saudi Arabia. And yesterday, giant posters featuring the head of Saudi Arabia shaking hands with U.S. President Donald Trump were against the backdrop of an Israeli flag. And they were all over Jerusalem and on trucks throughout Israel. And the message was, Israel is ready. So I am not clear who actually was funding this push, which is an interesting question. But do you think that Israel is ready for normalization with Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think Israel is relishing the prospect of normalization with Saudi Arabia. And the key question is, well, how do you do that, given, among other things, that the Saudi condition, and it's not as definitive as some people suggest. It is not there has to be a Palestinian state. It is that there has to be a credible pathway to a Palestinian state for us to be able to move ahead towards normalization. Well, you've got a new president with a very different approach, shall we say, to the previous administration. And he's the guy who brokered the Abraham Accords. And he's the guy who said, if you re-elect me, and we're talking about the last time, I'll get this done. He wasn't re-elected. And he said throughout his time, what is now one term in opposition before his return, he said, I had that deal was good to go. I would have done this and I was ready to do it and we can do it. And so Israel would be delighted if Trump can do it. And that, again, relates in a way to Smotrich and domestic Israeli politics. And we've had, we had a very interesting piece by Shalom Yerushalmi on the site yesterday about why Ron Dermer has been elevated to a more senior role, because these talks about the next phase of the Gaza Accord are not in isolation. They have all kinds of implications. And if politically, for example, Smotrich is thinking of leaving, but the administration and Dermer and everybody are involved here and making play, and there are so many wider potential benefits or implications. If there's a partnership with Saudi Arabia that takes greater depth and significance, that has huge relevance for Israel trying to face down Iran, for isolating Iran. This is now part of the bigger picture. So the Gaza deal is going to be, widely discussed in Netanyahu's meeting with Trump. But it's in a context of implications for Netanyahu domestically, for the nature of this government, and regionally. geographically? Are we now in this context looking at a bigger picture, which would involve progress on the Saudi front and growing isolation and pressure on Iran?
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. When asked earlier this week whether U.S. President Donald Trump thinks that a ceasefire will continue into phase 2, he seemed uncertain. Statements he's definitely made before. But U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff gave a kind of cup half full answer in saying, well, it's holding so far. So what is the status of the second phase negotiations right now?
Yeah, so in the same room at the same time, we should stress, Trump said one thing, and Witkoff, who's standing a few meters away, a few steps away, didn't quite say the reverse, but it was interesting. It's interesting, especially because we know, and Witkoff has been very careful to stress that he is Trump's envoy. He's there at the pleasure of the president. And I don't think there's daylight between them. So Trump was saying, no, I have no guarantees that it's going to hold. And Witkoff was saying, yeah, but it's holding for now. That's not a contradiction. It's an interesting difference of focus, shall we say. And again, including things like Trump repeatedly saying he thinks that Gaza needs to be cleaned out and Jordan and Egypt have to take in Gazans and the storm that this has ignited in the Arab world. There are all kinds of things that get said we now have experience when Trump is president, and you discount them at your peril, and you recognize the uncertainty that those kinds of statements can cause. In the context of the talks and the extension of the Gaza hostage ceasefire security prisoner terrorist release deal, we are now past the 16th day of the accord. That was yesterday, and that was the day when talks were supposed to resume on the specifics of the second phase, which is meant to start after 42 days or longer, potentially, if it takes longer to negotiate. Now, just to recap, there are 20 more hostages, 12 of whom believed to be alive, who are supposed to go free in phase 1. That is still playing out. That's playing out over the next month. In the next phase of the accord, if it is cemented and begins to be implemented, there are potentially 24 living hostages, according to what Israel believes and so on, who could yet go free. And therefore incredibly high stakes. But it also, phase 2, comes with a full Israeli withdrawal, including from the Philadelphia corridor, which you'll recall was a cardinal issue as far as Netanyahu was concerned in recent months. And then phase 3, if we got to that, would involve, among other things, reconstruction in Gaza. So very fraught. The question of whether, if you're moving through into phase 2, you're essentially saying that Hamas is going to be able to revive, or whether, from Netanyahu's point of view, I'm sure an issue will be whether he is confident that if things go wrong, or if inevitably Hamas raises its head, as we've already seen it doing, asserting a revival in the way that it's handled the hostage releases and so on. Netanyahu, I think, will need to feel, and I don't think that it's impossible by any means, that the United States will back Israel, as, by the way, all of Israel's security chiefs have said all the way through here, if and when it is necessary to again target Hamas. How this might play out, what kind of guarantee for what kind of subsequent military action, that's part of what I'm sure is going to be discussed. Maybe not at the highest level between the two leaders, but their teams and so on. If Israel withdraws, is it going to be able to go in? Is it going to want to go in and replicate the kind of intensive military operation at the start of the war? Almost certainly not. But then how do you tackle Hamas within an urban population which is beginning to return, or some of whom are beginning to return? It's incredibly complicated. And that's the mix here. You want to get the hostages out. Ultimately, you would like to see somebody else running Gaza. You would like to see reconstruction of Gaza, because if the territory is habitable and it's not Hamas who's running it, that is in Israel's presumed interest, I would say. But how do you do that? How do you get the hostages out without allowing Hamas to use the leverage? And that was always the plan, that we will retain the hostages and we will only release them in a context where we've basically guaranteed our capacity to return and do terrible things to Israel again.
So it sounds like from what we're hearing that it's possible that Netanyahu is going to shuffle his own deck a little bit. And it's possible that Ronen Bar, for example, will be out and potentially Ron Dermer will be in terms of conducting these negotiations. Do you think that a personality change could shift the perspective in moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reporting. A lot of it is leaked by people around the prime minister. And a lot of it is accurate, and some of it is less so. I think it is the case that Netanyahu is looking to maybe not immediately, if you hear what has been said in the last couple of days, but to change the negotiating team in that Ronen Bar will no longer be in it. It is pretty clear already that Ron Dermer is a key player here. I don't think I'm not sure there's going to be an announcement, but maybe there will. But obviously, as I've said already, for lots of reasons, including just the fact that here you have someone with very, very strong historic relations with this administration and key supporters of this administration. So Dermer is in a more central position for sure. David Barnea, who's the Mossad chief, Dudi Barnea, who was the head of the negotiations, as far as we know, is still part of that effort, has not been asked to leave the team, and is a key figure in terms of the concrete negotiations brokered by Qatar and by Egypt, relations with those delegations, and so on. So I think the Dermer role is coordinator, major emphasis on how do we do this in partnership with the United States. Barnea, still a very, very central figure in the mechanics and the practicalities and the details of the negotiations. And reportedly a very unhappy Shin Bet chief, Ronen Bar, who I'm sure does not lack for alternative areas to focus, but still apparently being sidelined.
So let's finish off with another look domestically. And yesterday, Justice Minister Yariv Levin declined to sign the official announcement of the appointment of Justice Isaac Amit as the new president of the Supreme Court. So instead, another judge signed it. And we're being told that Levin will also boycott the swearing-in ceremony next week at the president's residence. And there are rumors as well that the prime minister will also not attend the event. This feels to me like petty politics. I don't know, David. What are you thinking?
I think it spoils child politics. Hey, I didn't want this man. I spent 15 months defying the law, essentially, in not holding an election because I wanted him not to be chosen. And since they've chosen him anyway, I'm not coming and I'm not playing. And the only reason it's not petty is because this is the Justice Minister of the State of Israel, and he remains intent on, I would say, and other people can see this differently, and that's fine. You speak to other people on this podcast. He remains intent on subjugating the judiciary to the political majority in Israel. And this is a country with no constitution, no independent legislature. It's a tool of the political majority. And therefore, the only defense against abuse by the political leadership of Israel, by the elected political leadership, is an independent judiciary. And Yariv Levin is trying to stop that. So petty, taking my ball and going home, in not recognizing essentially the appointment of the head of that judiciary, but absolutely not petty and not marginal when it comes to the nature of democracy in Israel.
David, thank you as always for your insights today.
Thanks, Ahmad.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.